Hello and welcome to Sunshine for Your Life. Today I'm going to do something a little different, but it's really in line with what we've been studying in terms of Jesus' second coming. I want to go into the Jewish wedding ceremony. Now this is fascinating. It's fun to think about it, and it's really fascinating because the Jewish wedding ceremonies as they existed in times past were really a reflection of what God was doing. It pointed to Jesus' first coming. It points to Jesus' second coming. And a lot of people feel that it's one of the proofs of the pre-tribulation rapture because of the way that it's set up. Now, the Jewish people going through this process would not have thought about that. They wouldn't have understood that at all, but it was their tradition. And so I want to go into the wedding of the Jewish people as it was way back in history. I don't know if they follow all of this now, whether they do the same thing or whether they don't. But at any rate, they don't do all of it. But the wedding ceremonies in the past history were very reminiscent of history as we know it in terms of what happens and how it points to a rapture of the church. It really does when you stop to think of it. So I'll go through that today. So the Jewish wedding is a perfect picture of the rapture of the church. They would not have known this. They didn't even accept Jesus as the Messiah. But we know that when we look back at it. So in the Jewish wedding ceremony, the first thing that happens is the groom leaves his father's house and he goes and negotiates a purchase price for his bride. You know, it's not unusual in history where marriages were arranged. I've met some people who are the product of arranged marriages, and for them it's worked out okay. And sometimes the father of the bride meets the father of the groom and they negotiate a price. Because after all, the female in the family does a lot of work in the family, so he's losing not only his daughter, but he's losing somebody that's doing a lot of work. And so therefore he needs to be compensated for that. So it wasn't unusual in history for the father of the bride and the father of the groom to get together. They've negotiated this. She is going to marry his son, and there's going to be no choice about it. This has been planned. You see, it's a planned and arranged marriage. She can't say no. She has to marry this person that has been planned. And so because the father's going to lose a daughter who does a lot of work, he has to be compensated for that. And so they arrange a compensation, you know, in terms of finances, in terms of maybe they did it with animals. How many lambs would he have to give away to first for his son to marry somebody else's daughter? It was negotiated. Now, I talked myself with a person who was involved in a marriage that was arranged, and for them it worked out okay. And what they did was, she didn't meet her husband-to-be for quite a few years, but she knew that she was going to marry this person. And believe it or not, electronics took over and they've been able to talk to each other and know about each other through the internet. So it wasn't just a blind meeting. They did it through the internet. If she objected and didn't want to marry this person, she could object and the whole thing could be canceled. But in the past times, it wouldn't have been canceled and they would have get married. So what happens is that the groom leaves the home of his father and he negotiates the purchase price of his bride. For Christians, that would mean that Jesus left his Father's home. He came from heaven and negotiated the price of his bride. The church is the bride of Christ. His crucifixion, his death and crucifixion, was the price that he paid. That was the negotiated price for his bride to be his. And so then it goes on for there. Then the groom goes back to his father's house. That would have been the resurrection. And he stayed there for 1 year, and he built a home for his bride. You know, the Bible says that mansions, we have mansions. The Bible says, I go and prepare mansions for you. If it was not so, I would have told you. So far, symbolically, in the marriage, the groom leaves his family and there is a negotiated price for his bride. Then he goes back to his family for a year and builds a home for her. And while he is building a home for her, she is gathering things together that she will need to run a household. It's a trousseau. And so she gathers those things together. And in spiritually, if you want to say how does that reflect on heaven and hell, how does that reflect on what heaven is going to be like? Jesus comes from his Father's home, negotiates the purchase price for his bride, which is the church. His price is the crucifixion. Then he goes back to his Father's house, where he now is, back to heaven, and then he prepares mansions. And the Bible says that he has prepared mansions for you. Jesus said it himself, if it were not so, I would have told you. I go prepare a place for you. So all this is kind of symbolic, but it happens. So while he's gone, the bride prepares her trousseau. She collects all the things she's going to need to manage a household. Then after 1 year, in terms of the wedding, after a year, the groom goes after his wife. And she's ready, but she's veiled. She's ready, she's wearing her wedding dress, and she's veiled. Now, what does that mean spiritually? Well, on earth, we don't know who all the Christians are. We pass by Christians all the time. We don't know who necessarily they are. We are veiled because the world does not know who we really are. She is veiled because that's a part of the process of the wedding, and she's waiting for her. We are waiting for the Lord's coming. The Bible says, look up. You know, your redemption is coming soon. And we are waiting. She's waiting for her bride. And the Bible says that he is coming. This is in terms of Christianity, not just the wedding. The Bible says he's going to come like a thief in the night. When people feel secure, when they feel like things are okay, then he's going to come like a thief in the night. When does a thief come? At night, when he can't be seen. So she is waiting, and he comes at night. He comes after her with his entourage, and how does she know he's coming? With a trumpet blast. Remember the last time I brought in this instrument, which is a carriage horn. He has a trumpet blast, and that trumpet blast says he's coming for her. Now, the Bible also says it's with a trumpet blast that we are raptured, with a twinkling of an eye, with a trumpet blast. I've read those scriptures before. She's ready, her face is not seen, the world does not recognize her. What the world is going to recognize is the fact that millions of people have disappeared and nobody knows where they are. It'll be the Christians in the rapture. He comes after her in the wedding ceremony, the true wedding ceremony. He comes after her like a thief in the night. He comes at night. Whoops, lights went out, but they're back on again. So we have to remember that he comes as a thief in the night. For people who don't understand that, it is a surprise to them. They don't understand that. What happens anyway? Well, he comes as a thief in the night. He is waiting for him, and the Bible says to watch and to wait. Look up, your redemption draweth nigh. Look up, your redemption is coming soon. This is what the church is doing in the church age. We are waiting. We're working for him. We're doing his will. We're waiting for him to come again. We're waiting for that trumpet blast when we'll be gone. But you see, this happens in the wedding ceremony, but it's a symbol, but they're not going to understand what the symbol means. No one knows when the groom is coming. He comes at night with his entourage under cover of darkness, and he comes as a thief in the night. He blows a trumpet to announce his coming, and the Bible says there is a trumpet blast cross with the archangel there, and we are gone. Well, she is gone. He takes her, and he takes her to his father's house, and the wedding proceeds from there. The groom takes her back to his father's house, and there is a wedding, and the guests are already there. Who are the guests? Well, it would be people who have gone on before, people who have died and have been brought to heaven before, because after all, Jesus' crucifixion made it possible for when we die to go to heaven. It couldn't have happened without the crucifixion, but he made it possible. So the guests are already there. The bride is unveiled. Now she is seen. What is it? It's the church. The church is the bride of Christ. She is now unveiled and people see her. So the bride and the groom go into the house and the marriage is consummated, and then they come out and the celebration lasts for a year. That's going to be symbolic of the millennium. You know, and during that year, the man does not have any military service. Now, I know I've been in the Middle East, and I've gone through the customs and all of that, and they have young people who are in the service sometimes doing the customs. You know, they go through your luggage and make sure that everything is like it's supposed to be, and they make sure that you have your passports and all of that. A lot of them are young people in the service. When a young person graduates from high school, they're expected to spend a year in the service, both men and women. Doesn't make any difference. You know, we don't have a kind of system where people have to go into the service. But in Israel, both men and women, when they get old enough, when they graduate from high school, they have to spend a year in the service. That's their obligation. And they do. When you see them around in uniform doing various things. So therefore, you know, they are in the service and they are doing their work for a year. In the wedding ceremony, once the wedding takes place, the man does not have to be in the service or do any military service for a year. Symbolic of the millennium. The millennium is a 1,000-year period when Jesus comes back to earth, and then when he comes back to earth and sets of olives, he, you know, in a sense, I guess I should say there are two steps to the second coming. The first is the rapture, when we get taken up. Then after the tribulation is over, Jesus returns to earth with his saints with him on white horses, the Bible says. You know, and so that's really finishing the process of the second coming, and that starts the millennium, which lasts for 1,000 years, in which Jesus rules, and there is no problem on earth. There's no crime on earth. That's in the millennium. It goes on from there into being in heaven after that. So, and that's something I'll get into as we go along. So this lasts for a year in the Jewish wedding, and that would be symbolic of the millennium, and there's no military duty for any man. He is off military duty for a year. Now, this is what it means. And I've kind of described it as I go along. Here's a picture of a pre-tribulation rapture. Some people say the wedding ceremony is another proof of a pre-tribulation rapture. I wouldn't go quite that far, but I understand certainly where they're coming. Jesus comes down from heaven, his Father's house, and he negotiates a purchase for his bride, and that purchase is his own death. And Christians, remember, are part of the bride of Christ. He goes back to his Father's house because he's resurrected. He goes back to his Father's house and he prepares a home for his bride. These are the mansions that I'm talking about. The Bible says, I go prepare a place for you. There are mansions in heaven. If it were not so, I would have told you. In my house, this is in John 14:2, in my house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go prepare a place for you. And so your place is being prepared for even as we are down here waiting for his return, because that's what the bride did. She waited for his return, and we are doing the same thing. Now, we have been told to prepare, to be ready, and to watch for him, because the Bible says in a time when you least expect it, he's going to come. It'll be in the twinkling of an eye. To the earth, it'll be a surprise, and the trump of God will sound, and we will be gone. Now, when Jesus comes again, there is a trumpet blast, and the voice of the archangels. We are taken in the rapture. He comes as a thief in the night, and in fact, he says that he comes as a thief in the night. Then we go to heaven with Jesus, and the marriage is done. There's something called the marriage supper of the Lamb, and this is a great celebration, and we are going through this great celebration even as the world is actually going through the tribulation period. We have been taken up, so we are not going through the tribulation period. We are having this celebration, and this is like the marriage supper of the Lamb. We are married to the Lord, and the tribulation is going on earth. Now, the festivities may last for 7 years while the tribulation period goes on, followed by a 1,000-year millennium in which we rule with Jesus, and he comes back and rules in 1,000 years. So that's basically the wedding. Now, in the modern wedding, it's a little bit different than that. Men and women guests go say they're going to a Jewish marriage. From what I've read, now I'm not sure this is always being followed the way that I've read it, but this is what it's described. A lot of times there will be women going to the wedding, men going to the wedding. They are welcome to the wedding in different rooms. So if you are going to a wedding and your husband's going to the same wedding, you'll separate to be welcomed in different rooms. Usually the ceremony will take place underneath a huppah. I'm going to spell it, Huppah. This is a canopy, and it's like a tent-like thing. It's a canopy. I've seen it done. And it's supported by 4 poles. And there's an invocation, blessings are said. There is a cup of wine in which the couple drinks a little bit of the wine, and then rings are exchanged. The rabbi speaks, prayers are offered, and then they chant 7 marriage blessings. Then they drink from a second cup of wine, and the glass is shattered, and that's the end of the ceremony. The bride and groom go into seclusion for about 10 or 15 minutes or so, and they just eat and drink and break their fast. They fasted before the wedding, and this is what it's like. Then a benediction is said. Now the benediction is this. It says this: "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign in the universe, who discerns secrets, for the mind of each is different from the other, as is the face of each different from the other." In other words, it's saying, bless God, we're different. It recognizes the differences between the male and the female. Now, as they're going into the wedding, there are 2 circles in the beginning of the wedding ceremony. Their water is sprinkled in a circle, and then sand is sprinkled in an inner circle. And when they go in for the wedding ceremony, the bride is accompanied by her parents and anyone else she wants, and the groom is also accompanied by his parents and anyone else that he chooses. In our marriage system, the father brings the bride down. The mother doesn't, but the father takes the bride down. But it's not that way in a Jewish ceremony. Both mother and father take their child, their adult child, down to that circle, the circle of water and the circle of sand. That circle of water represents the flood. If you know Old Testament history, there was a massive flood, worldwide flood. Well, that represents the flood. And the inner circle of sand represents the earth rising to stop the flood. Now, when they get to the circle, they go in, the bride and groom go in, everyone else stays outside of the circle. They've come in with their parents, with their friends. They go in that inner circle, just the bride and the groom. Everyone else stays out. And then the marriage proceeds. Now the couple comes separately, as I said before. They sing or recite part of the Song of Solomon. The Song of Solomon is an Old Testament book, and it's basically love, and it's based upon love of a man for a woman. And they recite a little of that, and then they have a chain that's 7 knotted scarves, the colors of the rainbow, and it's draped around their shoulders. And they recite some scriptures, rings are exchanged, and they read a statement made to each other of promises that they made to each other, and then they kiss and everyone yells Mazel Tov. You want to know what Mazel Tov means? Congratulations and good luck. It's something like that. And they release flowers and balloons, and they shatter a glass. And it means a destruction. If you look in history, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and also the fact that a broken marriage cannot be mended. Now, I want to mention this, and it's important. Is that the groom has to give the bride a wedding band. If there's no wedding band, there's no wedding. There has to be a wedding band. That wedding band symbolizes eternity. If you take a look at a circle, where does a circle start and where does it end? You know, it could be any place. There's no such thing as really starting a circle and ending a circle. It's continual, round and round and round. So if they can't afford, in those biblical times, if they couldn't afford to, if the groom could not afford to give his bride a ring, a wedding band, he could rent one. You know, he could rent one until he could buy one. Eventually, she would get one of her own, and so he would have to provide a ring. This is basically what the wedding is like. In the old Jewish weddings, the groom comes from his father's house. He negotiates the bride, the price for his bride. He goes back to his father's house. He builds a home for her. She is watching and waiting for his return, getting ready for it, and then he comes and snatches her away. The wedding is consummated, and then there's a period of celebration. Well, isn't that the same thing as what's happening in Christianity? Jesus came from his father's house. He negotiated a price for his bride. That price was his crucifixion. He went back to his father's house. He was resurrected. He builds mansions for his people. If it were not so, I would have told you, I'd go prepare a place for you, he says. And then the waiting game starts. We're waiting for him to come after us in the rapture, and he is waiting to come to take us, but he comes as a thief in the night, so people don't recognize when it's going to happen. It happens quickly, then we are gone in the rapture, and then there's a great celebration, and then after that the millennium begins. And for us, the tribulation continues on the earth until it's finished. So that's really kind of a picture of the second coming of Jesus, or at least part of it, that we understand. Now, I'm running out of time, but I thought that was fascinating, and I thought it would kind of help you to understand things. The Jewish way of understanding things pointed the way to Jesus. They didn't necessarily recognize it, but it did, and it still does. So I'm going to close it here. We'll continue next time with more information. Please join me then.